Good afternoon. Welcome you all to the third session of the day, the session on cybersecurity. I invite Mr. Vishal Salvi from Infosys to start the session, please.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much, Gitika, for having us all here for this session. And you know, cybersecurity is such a topic today that everybody is concerned about it, either as an employee or even personally. When you look at your identities and your financial online personas, social personas. So I think it's clearly now. You know top of the mind agenda for all of us. What we wanted to cover today is, cover some important issues that we are currently dealing with when it comes to cybersecurity and privacy. But before I kick off the session, I just wanted to, acknowledge the work that has been done by the cybersecurity and the privacy professionals across the globe to deal with this current challenge that mankind is facing of the pandemic. And we had to pivot in a very short span of time to make all the corporations to work from home remotely. And that was not an easy task, but I think it appeared to be very easy because the digital innovation and the change that had happened had made us ready to be able to do the business and conduct business remotely. But at the same time, we had to do it at a different scale altogether when we were actually moving from offices to working from home. But I think a lot of times I feel that the thing which doesn't get that much recognition is the work done by the cyber sentinels in making sure that the integrity of these transactions and the confidentiality of the data remains absolute, even while we are pivoting to such a big different way of connectivity. So this is to acknowledge their work, and a big thank you to all of them for keeping the world and digital world safe and secure. Now, there are clearly various facets to cybersecurity, and it's an extremely fascinating world. And I've been privileged to be part of this industry for 2 decades now, and I've seen how it has transformed. But the three areas or three facets that we're going to look out today are going to be in terms of the cybersecurity world itself, in terms of what it really means to the corporations today. Second is we will touch upon topics on privacy, because privacy and cybersecurity go hand in hand in terms of how we look at this problem. And the third element is about the legal aspect of what does the law say, what are the implications. Clearly, if we given the panel that we have put up today, we can actually go for 24 hours and we'll still have a lot more to discuss. But we have the next 1 hour to really cover some very important pressing topics, and I'm looking forward to a very insightful conversation from my panelists. And so, like, I like to introduce all my panelists and friends from the industry, starting with Brijesh. Brijesh Datta is the Chief Information Security Officer of Reliance Jio. We have PK, Professor from Triple IT Hyderabad, who is a pioneer in uh, privacy and a lot of extraordinary work that he has done in privacy. And then we have Abhishek Malhotra, who is the managing partner in TMT, and he has been doing a lot of work on cyber law in the country. And so we will, pick his brains in terms of what's happening and get some ideas around it. So thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining today. And I want to just open it up with you, Brijesh. We obviously have the pandemic behind us now, and it's now been more than 18 months, and so the dust has settled down. we have kind of pivoted to a hybrid world. Everybody talks about how things are moving to cloud, orchestration is moving to cloud, and security is moving to the edge. All of that is happening. But from a point of view of from now and the future, because future is going to be hybrid. Some of the thing is known, a lot of it is unknown. What are the key imperatives for organizations when it comes to them looking at their cybersecurity strategy from here on for the next 3 to 4 years?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Vishal. Firstly, thanks for having me here on the CII forum. To my mind, Vishal, going forward, it's everybody is already planning to continue with the same model of cybersecurity, which is that we will consider that we are still all working from home as good as. Which means whether people sit in the office or at home, we are going to assume that everybody is still outside. And if you remember, this is something that is part of the beyond core model that Google has proposed around 10 years back. And it's now coming true, right? That there is no corporate boundary. Everybody is outside. And as long as we follow this fundamental principle that everybody is outside, right? There's nobody inside the office, and have equally strong controls and carry on from here, that's going to be a very secure model to work with. There is no such thing as a corporate boundary. And how do we do that? Right? And I think this is something that has been touted around by a lot of security vendors, right? By everybody. It's called that zero trust model, Forrester's zero trust model, right? And by and large, I think everybody is following it because it's based on certain sound principles, I think, which all of us know. First is, of course, that your devices, whatever our employees have got, they all need to be trusted. Secure devices, number one principle. Second principle, all humans, every employee that logs on needs to have strong authentication. Of course, I'm talking about two-factor authentication using various means, right? Passwords are gone, no more. If you rely on a password for any kind of remote access, it's a certainty, that organization is going to hack within the next few months, if not already so. I'm talking about remote access to the corporate applications and for privileged users, etc., etc. The third thing, to my mind, in this regard is privileged applications, right? Privileged systems. Access to them, we have to ensure they are not exposed directly. We have to restrict exposure of everything which is privileged. Why? Because all the admins are working from home, the operations guys are working from home. What I mean by that restricting exposure is not through VPNs. Going further, I think all of us have started adopting that thing, is a concept of breaking the session using something like a authenticated reverse proxy. So what helps there is your applications, the critical ones, are no more exposed. Even if they are vulnerable, they don't get compromised. There is generally now what's happening is there is a single gateway. There are a number of partners also, enterprises who are working in this line. For example, you have Zscaler, which has come out with this cloud, right? CloudFront has come out, Cloudflare has come out with this, Akamai has come out with this. Similarly, you have Citrix. They've come out with the concept of a virtual desktop. Through a Citrix desktop, you land onto a VDI and then have authenticated access. So limiting exposure of your privileged applications is also crucial to this new strategy. Because earlier, what used to happen? These privileged applications were only accessible from the corporate LAN. In a hybrid model, you can still do that. But the way this hybrid model is going to roll out, there are going to be a lot of operations guys who are still going to be working from home. So it does not make sense to continue with that concept of a corporate LAN versus internet, right? So the third thing I said was limiting exposure of privileged applications. And of course, finally, role-based access only. Authenticated role-based access to whatever needs to be done. There are many more controls, but those have always been true. It's not as if something is changing because of the pandemic situation, right? These are the things that I think are changing.
Thanks. I think that actually sets out a good tone, in terms of what we ought to be looking at. And I agree with you. I think a lot of these are very deep topics, and we'll try and come back to some of them
Right.
later. But let me turn to PK, and PK. I think and this is about really regulations and controls and laws. And I think from a privacy point of view, obviously each country is either has either initiated or introduced a privacy law or is in the process of doing one. And the world would have been obviously a much simpler and easier uh, place for compliance if we had one sort of a regulation to follow and a standardized you know expectations. But that is not the case, and as a result of that, it creates a lot of overhead cost, especially for global companies, who have to comply to different regulations across the globe, and make sure that they are on the right side of the law, right? And that becomes a big challenge. So what wanted to get a sense from you in terms of what is your view on this particular issue itself, and then more importantly, what are the steps, if you are aware of, which are being taken by various initiatives to try and see whether we can try and sort of create one kind of overarching framework, if you may, to try and reduce the overheads and make compliance simpler.
Thanks, Vishal, for the questions. Thanks, CII, for having me here. As a typical professor, I'm going to start the conversation with, for people on the chat, if you're from industry, can you type I? If you're from academia, type A. And if you're from government, type G. I would have done this raise hands, but I'm doing the same thing. Academia, very nice. Oh, wow. Vishal, it looks like I'm going to give a lecture to academic people. There are a few industry, more of academic world. Oh, very nice. Good. So we saw some academics and more of academics and some of industry. It looks like a more an academic conference now. Okay, going back to the question, Vishal, what is this? I think the big question is the trade-off, right? What do I get out of this trade-off of, so to say, monitoring, trade-off of privacy expectations, right? Typical trade-off would be, let's take a utility versus privacy. If you draw, it will be a decreasing function. And if you think about it, it's very hard to find a sweet spot on this space, right? On this space of so to say products that you want to build, solutions that you want to create, laws that you want to have also. Overarching thing, I think, I don't know whether it will be a utopia to think about having an overarching, I mean, two sets of people, particularly in a country like India, right? Two sets of people living, staying next to each other from different states, don't even connect in culturally similarly, right? So the expectation, definition of privacy, everything is so extremely different. So I think it's going to be extremely hard to get overarching, but I think efforts are being made at probably different verticals, geographical verticals in that sense. But coming up, I at least I think that it will be very hard to think of overarching goal, overarching law or something like that for privacy. Coming to the point of how industry should think about looking at these different expectations from different places, I think there needs to be thinking about implementation purposes. Meaning, I think some of them can be handled technically also, because all these expectations can be somewhere. This is a very computer science answer to it, but all of these policies can be somehow written in some machine readable format, and then it could be. I mean, I think there are enough practices that people have tried for. Laws in HIPAA and other laws in the US, converting them into a program, machine readable format, and then using that to make decisions, right? Now, the most difficult part, I think, I'm sure Abhishek will have a better insight on this, right? The legal aspect of it is understanding the context to it, right? The semantic meaning to it is the hard part. Can we try and figure out what is the semantic meaning of some of these things and express them in some machine readable format, so which can actually help systems to make choices and decisions rather than actually having human beings sitting and making choices, like Brajesh's team, I'm sure, will have some expert who look at, let's take US laws, European laws, and then try and figure out what's going on. All that, yes, that's needed, but can we actually take that expert's approach and build technologies around it, which can actually help bring some of these global views together? I think that would be my suggestion, if that would be okay with, to think about bringing this global privacy together.
Hey, thank you, PK,
Yeah, Vishal.
for that. And I think we'll again come back to that topic, because it's obviously very interesting to look at how the regulations are evolving, and it obviously at some stage, the localization part and the data sovereignty part and all of these are creating a significant impact to global organizations in terms of cost, and anything which we can use to automate it to help in compliance would obviously be a better and a cost effective way of doing privacy implementation. uh, I would like to turn to you, Abhishek, right now, and slightly different question. In the cyber world, when we are building various strategies, one of the obviously the one of the important strategies to know your enemy and try to understand get deep understanding of who the threat actors are, understand their strategies, and then really once you know the enemy, then the art of war is much easier, and you can build a counter strategy and defense around how you manage it. But one of the things that is a part of a conventional war is a counterattack, right? If not just defense but counterattack, and clearly, as cybersecurity professionals, the moment we start looking at anything related to a counterattack, it starts getting into something which could be unlawful. Like from Indian context, you would be non-compliance to an IT act. Uh, so I just wanted to understand from you, are there any ways by which you can create a strategy of counterattack without really, you know, uh, having any non-compliance or going on the wrong side of the law?
Vishal, that kind of a question, and I would like to contextualize it. And my approach towards answering questions, whether it comes from a client or whether what's been thrown at me right now, is always to visualize that first in the brick and mortar world, and then to see how one can apply that to the digital domain. Because the brick and mortar world is what has the application of laws. There are precedents, you can perhaps apply them, and you can come to a conclusion as to what the judge is likely to conclude in those fact circumstances. The instances in the digital world are fewer, so you try and draw parallels and then you arrive at your conclusion. So in this case, I'll just give you an example to try and give context to my answer. My house is robbed by someone. Can I go back and rob that person's house? Possibly not. And that's exactly what your question is, that is there a counter attack strategy available to me? I think what's important is where the departure comes in between the brick and mortar world and the digital world in this context, in this example. Whereas in the brick and mortar world, I would just go and complain to the local police station that I have been robbed, and please accordingly not only locate the person, the perpetrator, but also try and get me some remedy in terms of putting them behind bars, getting my stuff back, etc. In the cyber world, not only because of the fact that the there is a greater responsibility thrust upon the organization to have systems in place in order for them to be able to protect their data, information, etc. but also because of the fact that the prosecution and investigating agencies are yet not trained enough to be able to deal with such instances. The situation differs slightly, inasmuch as I will, as a first up sort of response to such an incident, try and evaluate whether I have put my house in order or not. I will try go back and see what my vulnerabilities were. I will go back and see whether I had put in the adequate security measures in place. I will go back and check whether I was complying with the standards that are required to be imposed, that the law imposes upon me. And once I make that assessment, the next step, or possibly the parallel step, will also be to report that to certain and try and figure out whether there is any assistance that I can get in any regard through the law enforcement agencies, including the cybercrime cells in that particular state. Specifically on the answer of whether I have a counter attack strategy available, we are presuming here that I know who the perpetrator is, which in itself could be a difficult situation to assess. But if the perpetrator is someone from my own company or from my own home in that sort of sense, I know that it is an easier task for me to undertake, which is to perhaps terminate that person's employment. Also, without getting into the zone of defamation, make it adequately known that this person is not trustworthy, and therefore make it difficult for that person to possibly get another sort of source of employment. And of course, take this assistance of the police to um, take steps against that person or that organization, and that's possibly the only retaliatory measure that I have under law. If I take an active step, which also breaches the extant law, then I am equally liable. So I think that's where, of course, where we are, and in terms of obligations of compliance to mandatorily report what I need to report. I think that's the IT rules are fairly sort of detailed in that regard. But broadly speaking, the instances of targeted intrusion, the compromising of critical networks, website defacement, all those instances is where I necessarily mandatorily need to inform CERT. Otherwise, I have an option to do it or not.
Yeah, so before I move to the next question, I had one additional question on that topic to you, Abhishek, which is if you look at it, there are commercial services available which actually plant their analyst into the deep dark web uh, to collect and be part of the system so that they're able to understand the strategies and work with them, collect information, and accordingly then get threat intelligence.
Correct.
um, how is that seen by the law?
So the law, to my mind, is yet to develop with regard to the legality of that process. No one has really brought it into question yet. But if I'm not, if I understand you rightly, you're talking about ethical hackers in that sense, right? Uh,
Slightly different. See, ethical hackers
hmm,
are still, you know, we sort of given them the mandate and they are, attacking and identifying vulnerabilities on your infrastructure. I'm talking
correct.
about good guys getting into the bad guys' world
Hmm.
and, you know, and trying to work with them and collect. So they become like them, right? Although they don't attack, but
Understand?
they become, yeah, and
Yeah.
they become part of the dark web. Yeah.
You're planting a mole in order to gather, important sort of inputs and data in as to how the bad guys work, so that you can perhaps address it a little better. See, there are two ways of looking at it. A, whether this is actually prompted sort of or motivated by a law enforcement agency in order for them to be able to gather evidence data against, let's say, a synchronized activity that is ongoing, and which is where again, I think it's very easy to relate to a lot of the crime thrillers perhaps which we would have seen, where you have instances of law enforcement agencies engaging their own people within the, let's say, police, and planting them as moles in those organizations and trying to get that information. The second, and of course that's perfectly a way that is been accepted by the law, Again, I'm drawing parallels from the brick and mortar world, and that I don't see any difficulty with that. The greater an ambiguity would be where the person who's actually so engaged is not a law enforcement officer, and that's an independent consultant, someone who's very well versed with the technology in order to be able to get that access. There will have to be an I mean, from the point of view of the person who's actually being planted, they will have to ensure that they are protected adequately by the prosecuting machinery to be, let's say, taken on, because essentially they're collecting evidence, and that evidence is what is going to be called into question when, as and when such prosecution takes place. So they will be, in that sense, in a worst case scenario, be considered to be an approver, because possibly in the course of gathering that evidence, they may be engaged in an activity that could constitute criminal activity under the IT Act or the IPC, as the case may be. So, in that sense, they will have to seek that protection and get that commitment in writing in advance that this is something that they're undertaking for this particular purpose. And as we see the development of the law and specific situations that get challenging, I would think that our law is flexible enough. And if not so, possibly there could be amendments brought in to specifically target this sort of a situation.
Hey, thank you so much, Abhishek. Okay, so Brijesh, I think you talked about beyond core. You talked about zero trust architecture, application-based access, privilege access control, strong authentication, passwordless authentication, multiple things. And we know in the cybersecurity world there are plethora of technologies and tools. The attack surface is growing. We don't have a choice but to have that complex cybersecurity architecture. But we also, as a CISO, we also have this objective of trying to create an architecture which is optimal, from a cost point of view. It is something which is deeply integrated so that it is able to, work for what it's expected to do. And it is effective, which means primarily it is actually delivering the core objective of actually that control, what it is meant for, right? So what is your advice, in terms of, how does the CISO really balance all of this and then look at this complex world and try and make sense out of it, and what should they do, because it looks like a very hard problem to solve.
Yeah, absolutely, Vishal. In fact, recently I was in one of the forums where there was a lot of medical CIOs of the medical industry, right? And one question that stuck out amongst almost every CIO was, I am completely confused. Every vendor tries to give me a pitch and tries to tell me that his product is going to sort out all his worries. One problem. The second problem that I heard was, and again, this is across the board, the moment I buy a product, right, my board starts thinking that all our cybersecurity woes are now going to be over. And if there is still a compromise or there a problem, then they ask you, what happened? You just purchased something. How come you haven't sorted out your problem yet? These are very, very real problems, right? And again, no ready answers, but let me take a stab at it, right? And I think intuitively, every CISO does that. Anytime a CISO joins an organization, I think the first thing that he does is try to understand the exposure of that particular company. What is this company all about? What is the risk profile of this company, and where is this company exposed? What level of maturity are they at, right? So I think that is the first step to decide, and so not to get flooded with these various tools that are in the market and everyone pitching it to you, is understand what you need. And my advice is, firstly, we need to focus on fundamentals. With this overwhelming flow of information that you're getting cloud enabled, so you need to on Azure you need to use Sentinel, on GCP you need to use their own SIM, then you need to have EDR controls, you need to have SASE controls. These are buzzwords. Fundamentals is where it started. And you know what? Interestingly, Vishal, 20 years ago, when Microsoft Windows came out, they used to tell you just three things. Number one, they used to say, hey, keep your antivirus updated. Have an antivirus. Number two, they used to say, keep your firewall on. And number three, they should ensure that your system is patched. Surprisingly, these three things are still so true. Yeah? And they're the biggest problems to solve. Patching is one of the biggest problems to solve till now. And I don't know of a single organization who got patching right there. I'm talking about patching of the operating systems. I'm talking about patching of the databases, the middleware, right? So fundamentals is where it starts. And by the way, the fundamentals goes even earlier. I mean, Windows 20 years back, Microsoft was talking about laptops, right? In modern day data centers, in clouds, it has to start from your assets. Do you even know what's going on? For example, you might do a pen test today, right? And figure out that there are 3 vulnerable systems. 4 days later, when you try to close it, those systems are vanished. They're not there. Why? Because somebody was doing a pilot. He turned on a VM for 1 day and then he shut it down the next day. And the 4th day, when you went to close that one thing, there were 3 new vulnerabilities that might have come up. Asset is where it starts first. Every CISO, firstly, before you start going anywhere near a security, you need to get the asset management right. On your clouds, on your data centers, on wherever you are. Next, of course, is patching. And we have to ensure that everything is updated. We know what I'm talking about, right? Application security assessments, really, really important now. But the problem is, we're in the agile world, right? The DevOps teams, in order to get competitive, wants to roll out 10 patches a day, 10 updates a day. Do you have people to do a pen test 10 times a day? No, right? So that is something that everybody's grappling with. How do you make sure that your developers build in security, right? How do you have what is called as DevSecOps? Now, even in the DevSecOps, you'll find so many vendors pitching in tools, right? But that's a start point. The idea is to shift left security towards developers so that the applications are also secure, right? Then comes, of course, malware control is very, very common now. The trend that we see now, right, and that's going to go further and further. It's not humanly possible for any signature-based detection or any anomaly detection using standard signatures. Across the board in cybersecurity, everything is becoming machine learning and AI enabled. Malware control, security event management systems, security orchestration systems, threat intelligence platforms, analytics platforms, everywhere there is machine learning, right? So that's, those products, in case one decides to buy malware control, do not go in for anything which does signature-based checks anymore. They are absolutely redundant anymore. The explosion of data and the various kinds of attacks that are coming in, and by the way, our attackers are getting smarter and smarter. They are using all the same techniques for fuzzing, for instance. I mean, there was this question, in the previous with Abhishek about attacking back. To give you a small snapshot, Vishal, even you know what I'm talking about. At least 500,000 attacks a day on our perimeters by bots. Humans might be a small fraction of them, maybe around 200 attacks by humans. These are enormous volumes, and there are various strategies they use, right? Which is not humanly possible to look at lines and see which is the actual attack. So the products that we procure for malware management have to be AM. And lastly, of course, identity and access management systems. I've reserved it for the end because this is crucial now, identity and access management. I'd mentioned a bit earlier about it, and I think most of the audience know what I'm talking about. Without IAM, right, if you have user IDs and passwords and people are sharing passwords, everything is going to go for a sixer. Right, so this is about it. And if whenever you decides to procure some products, right, a vendor will tell you replace everything, right? Rip it apart. No organization in the country, anywhere in the world, can rip out what they already have, right? The best we can do is make sure that whatever we buy is what is called as either API enabled, or it can export its events and logs to some system that is capable of ingesting them and dealing with them. This is in answer to your question about orchestration, integration, right? Together, run everything. And in the next generation systems that we are seeing, this is becoming more and more true. And I'm not only talking about security. You see, every system that's getting built now is API enabled, microservice enabled for number one, performance monitoring. What we as security practitioners need to do is make sure that they are API enabled for security also, every product. Now that then a lot of questions will pop up, what do I do with my legacy system? That's not API enabled, right? I don't have a ready answer, but that is where we have to work on some kind of exporting mechanism, right, to integrate them with our modern day platforms for threat intelligence and threat analytics. Like we were speaking earlier, Vishal, I can go on and on, but I'll hold my horses on right here for you to add on more.
No, I think no that this is good, fascinating stuff, because I just last week blogged on how patching is a difficult problem to solve, and I call it as the boring stuff, doing the boring stuff, right? Because
Right.
it's a thankless job, right? And
Right.
you got to do it day in, day out, and in the interestingly, the amount of vulnerabilities which are being released are doubling every year, right? And the refresh cycles for operating systems is shrinking, to 18 months, so there are multiple challenges, and attack surface is growing. So getting a good visibility and control over that, and doing this boring stuff, and motivating people, teams to do it, and recognizing that effort is the biggest challenge, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so let me go back to PK now. PK, I think when you look at the cybersecurity and the privacy topics, they are, I almost think that they are cousins, or brothers and sisters, right? And there are clearly a lot of areas where the synergies are very obvious and evident, right? For example, if you want to protect your PII, you come to cybersecurity, and then cybersecurity teams will help you to mask it or anonymize it or encrypt it, and help you to build the safeguards, right? So there are clearly those synergies. But then there are other areas where they are in conflict with each other, right? In terms of not able to do monitoring. Like in today's context, there are technologies now available which can help you to monitor the activities done by employees at home, in terms of taking photographs of the information or not. But because of privacy, very little can be done right now in terms of doing those kind of monitoring of individuals, right? And rightly so, no debates on that. But I think that's an interesting kind of play which is happening between cyber and privacy. So do you want to share your thoughts on what is your view on this, both in terms of synergies as well as the conflict?
Yeah. Before that, Vishal, I was actually raising my hand to ask a question to probably Brijesh and other industry folk, because I think Brijesh was giving an answer of, let's look at fundamentals, let's move the development of security to security to developers, products, all that. My question to industry people is that how much of this expectation that you have from the sort of the developers and tool builders that you actually talk to academia, talk to schools to embed these things in the programs that we teach here to build capacity that can help you build these products better. So I think that question I was just waiting for Brijesh sharing my hand. Unfortunately, the raise hand feature is only for the participants, I guess, not for
No,
us.
and also
Yeah.
your video is going so down, so I can't see you while I was talking. So
Yeah,
sorry
yeah.
about that.
Yeah. So does anybody want to take a shot at it, Brijesh or Vishal? Because
Yeah,
I think,
sure.
this
Very,
is,
very. So honestly, PK, very little interaction with academia and with the people who train these developers. Very, very little.
yeah.
I think that is the need of the hour. In every computer science course, I think we should mandate a cybersecurity course also. One at least course should be mandated. I think that is something that needs to be done to actually tell the, because you see developers make such trivial mistakes, and because of lack of awareness, nothing else, right?
Yeah. So but Brijesh, just to give you a context, I think the introduction to computer security is already there. I think intro to computer security or computer security 101 is there across BTech programs now. I think network security has been embedded as a sort of say more like a core course now in all the BTech programs. But I think for what you're looking for, I think it's just beyond that. No, this is not teaching you how to code, or this is not doing secure coding. This is not doing how to build products more safer. There's only there is less IPsec hota hai, right? Very fundamental
It's
stuff.
a huge topic. It's a huge topic. PK. I
Right,
can
and
imagine.
people like you, people in industry should come and do it because we can't teach. No, we don't know what what
Right.
all the
But I
expectations.
think PK, I think there are actually, Brijesh has raised a very important topic, and you asked that question. See, it's actually a mindset issue now. Okay,
Yeah,
it's not about you know because in today's context in cybersecurity, unless you shift left, we are doomed to fail.
yeah,
Okay,
Absolutely.
because but traditionally security work has always been externalized to the cybersecurity folks,
yeah,
Right.
right? It is not going to scale. So unless you do security by design, you will always be at a problem. Okay,
yeah,
and if whatever work we can do with academia or all, but this fundamental change has to happen, and we need to
yeah.
talk more about it for it to happen.
Yeah, and then just to flag, and then I'll move on to the answer to my. So Vishal, but this secured by design and all that, Vishal has not come yet into academia. Academia thinks that as a very philosophical thought. No, we don't do that. Meaning, just if you do a survey of, let's take how many schools teach secure coding, it's very minimal, Vishal. I have tried it before with some companies, all that, but that's it. It's one off. Few of us did, but it's not a consistent one. It's not it become a need of the hour like what Brijesh is saying. Oh, we need secure products, but that's your problem, right? Academia is doing something else, right?
Right.
All right. So yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So my answer to Vishal's question, right? This trade-off, confidentiality and privacy. Where do I see Vishal? I actually this has been my. You may have heard this before, or others whoever are on the call who has heard me speak before. Vishal, I don't know whether we really understand the problem from an empirical standpoint. I think if you ask any of us, no, what is security or privacy? What kind of decisions are we making? All that. Many of them seem to be very anecdotal, Vishal, right? So एक hack हो गया, एक knee jerk reaction की कुछ होगी, या understanding of the problem of empirically. For one of my favorite things about this empirical thing is Alan Weston or Helen, these kind of people who have done empirical studies to show that, okay, you can question that. You can question the results, saying that, oh, look, can you look at people as three different categories: fundamentalists, pragmatists, and unconcerned? Can you think of actually what kind of decisions do fundamentalists make, and how do they transform their decision making when the context changes? Which is what contextual integrity is, which Helen came up with this idea, right? All of these things are available, but particularly, let me just put the Indian context, right? Abhishek was talking about putting the context. If you just keep the Indian context, Vishal, we don't even understand, Vishal. I don't know whether any of us can say that in your own organization, what kind of security awareness people do you have? And even though, let's take that as a sense of, oh, you can say that 30%, 40%, but do they make decisions? They make decisions in different contexts in different ways. Probably in your company decision, Brajesh's, Geo's, their security team does, but how are they doing it in their social media? Do they have this belief of security versus confidentiality? What they do well in company, is it translated in I somehow feel like we don't have a empirical understanding of the problem, for which we need work. First of all, we need to understand, because Vishal, is more CCTV useful, or is more of accessing your web browsing history to monitoring, is that infringing on my privacy? CCTV on the malls, is it infringing on my privacy? I don't know. No, what level? Meaning, we can come up with solutions. Meaning, I'm pretty sure many of you are reading, right? Delhi has so many cameras to do surveillance. Blah blah blah. Delhi is listed in the top few cities in the world in terms of action. It's good that you're giving the surveillance, but on the privacy side, do we understand that what has it put Delhiites because of these cameras? Meaning, do we know those kind of? No, we don't know. At least I have not seen any empirical evidence of whether public believes that, look, this surveillance is actually helping us, right? So my stand on the answer is, let's get more understanding empirically, and then actually only we can look at where to draw that line of the sweet spot.
Got it. Got it. Okay, so I wanted to now move to Abhishek. And Abhishek, I think, one of the biggest challenge for cybersecurity professional has been, really going and attributing. First of all, if you're able to attribute a attack to a perpetrator, and even if you do, how do we then, use the law and enforcement machinery to go and apprehend that person, wherever that is. And in today's, I mean, in cyber world, it's always, people are in different parts of the globe, right? So, but we have not seen too much of success in really trying to understand who that threat actor is. So, your views, in terms of where we are today, in terms of that collaboration, in terms of really having any chance of, nabbing those individuals and building a good deterrent for them, because right now it is a asynchronous war, and there is really no deterrent or a threat for anybody being caught, if at all. But your views on that?
Yeah, sure. So just to again, and I know PK just mentioned this, so and I like to use this term to give context. The possible it's envisaged that in 2021 alone, the loss on account of cyber crimes is going to be to the tune of $61 trillion. Massive figure. Clearly, if nothing else, I mean, forget about the aspect of whether the law enforcement agencies are up to it, etc. The opportunity, whether it is for industry or for the legal profession or for anyone else, to actually create a mechanism to deal with this is huge. And as in a lot of instances, law is always, if not more, then at least two steps behind the criminals, right? And specifically in the cyber division. But all is not lost. It's not a completely pessimistic world. We have, for whatever it is worth, a 20-year-old legislation that puts in place a fair amount of infrastructure to be able to deal with it. We have had, or at least in most states of India, we do have a cybercrime cell. Whether or not there is cooperation interstate is another question. It's something which is more, I guess, a political issue more than an actual cooperative cooperation between the authorities. But at the international level, we've seen at least a greater amount of move, at least, of course, among the developed nations to have this sorted out sooner rather than later. And I'd like to identify about five such initiatives. One has been the OECD, always at the forefront of trying to figure out solutions to resolve this growing issue. They started out in '83 and have, to a large extent, taken leaps in trying to resolve this. Though the last set of guidelines that they came out with is in 2002, there have been more informal updates to those, but that remains the parent document. There is, of course, the UN set of, the General Assembly adopted certain resolutions in as far back as 2000, December 2000, and that seems to be setting the trend for adoption by countries that need to look at this to address cyber crimes. There is also a Convention of Europe set up by the Council of Europe in relation to cybercrime. That's a little more forward thinking and has taken a greater amount of steps to resolve this issue. There is the G8 has created a subgroup on high tech crimes, and they are implementing that and using that as best practices to take things sort of forward and also spread this awareness amongst other countries. And more importantly, from an investigation, from a knowledge sharing perspective, the Interpol has recognized the importance of this and set up a global sort of kind of an initiative where they have the cybercrime collaborative services. Importantly, one part of this, of course, is the collaboration platform on an operational level that is only open to law enforcement agencies. There's knowledge sharing, there is intelligence sharing, there is support provided for what's going on in terms of evidence gathering, authenticity thereof, maintenance, preservation of that evidence. And there is also cybercrime knowledge exchange workspace, which is not limited only to the prosecution agencies from all over the world. Even private entities can apply and request to join this particular platform. and get access to not only best practices, information that is not necessarily, need to be confidential, etc. But I think the real resolution of the problem will be, as one of the authors that I was reading about recently had said, that at a very, very basic and fundamental level, unless we are able to resolve these three issues, we will not be able to move forward. A, there has to be common definition of what is a computer crime. We still don't have a common definition acceptable across the world. B, we will have to have an alignment of our criminal law jurisprudence from the point of view of jurisdictional issues, from the point of view of enforcement of that. And three, standardization of how you collect digital evidence and how you preserve it. If we are able to resolve these three issues and have standardization amongst the authorities across the world, then a lot of these problems could be resolved. But I think, as I said, there are efforts clearly across various entities, governments, but no final resolution yet.
Thank you, Abhishek. So this is obviously fascinating conversation, but we are running out of time. But I just wanted to squeeze in one rapid fire kind of a question to all of you. So basically, what is maybe three advices to, maybe Brijesh, you can talk about advices to CISO, PK, you can talk about advisor to a data privacy officer, and Abhishek, your advice to a general counsel of any organization, right? From a cybersecurity context, what would those be? So let me start with Brijesh. Brijesh, you are on mute.
Yeah. Sorry. Um, so, one advice, I think, Vishal, I'll dispense with three because we've spoken about a lot. And
Sure,
I'll
sure.
give only one thing to cybersecurity experts, in case there are some practitioners on this forum. Cybersecurity is now becoming a completely engineering subject. So therefore, every cybersecurity guy needs to now upskill. It's with the current cloud enablement, right? Where and with the agile development model, where people are rolling out changes in containerized environments, right? Functionless computing on clouds, Lambda functions, for example. The latest technology and the speed at which these changes are happening, and the enormity of the data that's getting generated, right? There's an explosion of data everywhere, and at a very fast speed, this change is happening. The conventional security controls are not good enough to handle that. So the need of the hour is our security folks to really understand what will it take for the security folks to catch up and understand what's going on in that environment and build security controls appropriately. And I'm talking about across the span, from protection controls, detection, response capability, right? In various environments, we need to upskill and upskill very, very fast. This is becoming a major problem in terms of talent. As it is, we have acute shortage of engineers in the general area of cloud computing, right? In the general area of development for agile, in the area of machine learning and AI ML. And here, the security folks are on lookout for experts who can actually find holes in them, right? Who can find gaps in them and build systems. So this is a problem that I think all of us are grappling with, and it's obvious when you see the LinkedIn posts from various folks, right? From your teams, from our teams, and everybody. Everybody's on the lookout for cybersecurity engineers. Upskilling of our existing workforce is key. That's my one last message, Vishal.
Thanks. PK?
Speak to academia more. Right? Right? Okay. So my three, it's a rapid fire. So my three things: be empirical, keep the trade-off in mind, speak to academia more.
Thank you. Abhishek?
Be very close to your CISO so you can figure out what the hell is happening in your organization, and so that you understand the systems so well that because you are the one who has to give the response, you are the one who's liable for compliance and for risk mitigation. So you have to work very closely with the people who know the technology, understand that technology, digest it, and be able to come up with that solution in a timely manner. Two, I mean, this is of course from a technical standpoint. From a legal standpoint, know your compliance obligations. What exactly it is that needs to be done. There too, cooperate with the relevant people within the organization to do that. And three, drill into the management the importance of privacy and cybersecurity. If you're able to achieve that third, I think the rest will easily follow.
Okay. So I think like I said, right, we will never run out of topics, and we can also forget that there is audience listening to us because we're having a conversation, right? And that's the beauty of the topic itself. But I think it was a fascinating conversation, to have with all of you, because you're coming out from such a diverse and deep experience in each of your areas. And we straddled around so many different topics, in terms of what we need to do for, the future of cybersecurity, to looking at, the challenges that we are having in terms of the balance between privacy and, cybersecurity, the law and how we look at it, what's happening in terms of uh, you know trying to make it easier for people to work together and collaborate, and what are the different initiatives which have been taken. All of these are great topics. I hope the audience have found it very useful, but I just am keen to close on time, and so we are on the dot. So I just want to thank you, all of you, Abhishek, Brijesh, and PK, for a very wonderful conversation, and look forward to meeting you again, in some other place somewhere soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us, Vishal, and the
Likewise.
CII.
Bye
Thanks a
now.
lot for this.
Okay.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.